everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar. I am so thrilled that you could join us. My name is Sam Anderson. I am a teacher trainer for C2 Education. I've been started out as a teacher over 10 years ago, working with many students of all different ages and all different subjects, a lot of them focusing on GPA, really helping them, go from those midterms and those, that middle of the year time and really gearing them up for the second semester, looking into, all the aspects, finals, those sort of state exams, whether it be, the park or something else, as well as, how to get into the summer effectively. And so I'm really happy to be here and be talking about that today. But today I'm also joined by a coworker, a friend of mine, Casey Perkins. Casey?
Hi everyone, like he said, my name is Casey Perkins. I've been working with C2 since 2012, and I started off, like Sam, as a teacher in the classrooms where I worked with students of all ages, but especially focused on helping students with their college preparatory stuff, as well as helping them keep their GPAs strong throughout their entire time at college. I now work helping our new hires get trained and started at C2, and today we're here to talk to you a little bit about how to make your second semester successful. So Sam's going to tell you a little more about that.
Right. So, last time, right, we had a webinar on this topic, right? How to go about making second semester, successful tips, tricks, what to do, how to get ready. And there were a lot of questions. We sort of opened it up. We asked people to bring in some questions. We asked people, also who, when you registered for this webinar, we asked you to sort of put forth any questions that you had on the second semester. Whether it was as junior, sophomore, freshman, senior, any particular grade, middle school, it didn't matter, just to get questions. And we sort of took those questions and we sort of broke them down. We took a look at them. We saw what was really popular in terms of a question, as well as, put in some questions that we'd received from some of our students in our centers as well. And we sort of put together some of the biggest, most sort of common questions, the big ones that we felt most students really were concerned about and wanted to be answered. And we sort of put them here. And today, Casey and I are going to sort of talk through them. So we categorized them in particular categories. And the first one, and obviously when you're talking about school, right, you're talking about your grades, your GPA. It's always the big challenge. It's always what you're focusing on the most. Biggest concern, right? You get those grades, you get those report cards, maybe you have a power school or some online portal. And, it's always that big challenge. And the first sort of big question we got was not just about like, how do you keep your grades strong, right? That was sort of a over classic question. But one of the big ones that we thought really was worth talking about was, hey, I'm struggling in the class, I'm struggling at first semester. Should I drop this course? Should I not take the course, right? If it's an elective, perhaps, or if it's something required, is it something I should move down to a lower level one, right? If I'm in honor, should I go to regular? If I'm in, let's say I'm in a higher level course, should I drop down? And if not, help me. What should I do? So Casey, do you have any sort of thoughts and ideas on this one?
Oh yeah, I definitely do. So this is something a lot of our students struggle with, especially those of us who are trying to take some of those advanced classes like AP courses. It's certainly something I had a hard time with when I was in school too. And the basic answer is that ideally you should not be dropping down or going down a level. This is especially true if you're kind of butting up against or past your add drop date at school, because that can reflect poorly on your transcript as well. So we know already that keeping a high GPA is really important for your college admissions, but your course load and how hard you're working in your classes, what difficulty level, what challenge you're giving yourself is also equally important, or at least close to equally important. It's also very important. So if we want to avoid dropping down a level, what are we going to do about that then? So first, note and just remember for yourself that while of course it's ideal to have the high GPA every year, every semester consistently, colleges also appreciate and look favorably on improving over time. So if you're able to improve your grade in the second semester from your first semester, that can help with the way that your transcript and your image looks to the colleges. Then a lot of our other tips are going to have to do with study skills and managing your time well, which we'll talk a little bit about more later. But on that note, Sam, did you have anything you wanted to add about managing that difficulty?
Yeah. So, I want to sort of harp on the fact that, as you were saying before, that improvement over time, because it's something that, I feel like, for a lot of my students, I always felt like they sort of had this feel like they had to be great out of the gate, which is, good if you're a horse and you're just trying to do a lap. But as a student, like, it's not the case, right? You're human. You're going to make mistakes. And at the end of the day, a mark of being, a strong student is that you learn from those mistakes. So if you make a mistake, if you're not doing as great in a particular grade, in a particular class, making sure that you learn from it and you're going to grow from it. You don't just give up. Especially we are talking, right, second semester, and a lot of times those full year courses, if you're in 2 different courses for those 2 semesters, that's going to be on your transcript no matter whether there's an add drop or not. And so really keeping that in mind, that, you have to make sure that, okay, fine, I made that mistake. Great. I'm going to make a plan. And I know during the previous webinar, right, we talked about that, making a plan, having goals to set yourself up to get through that plan and break it down. And so you always want to make sure, like, that you're going to grow. So it's okay if you struggled. It's okay if maybe your grade wasn't as high as you were hoping it to be. Show that growth, show that learning, because we all learn from those mistakes, and colleges like to see that. High schools, if you're in middle school and you're trying to apply to a specialized high school, they're going to want to see that too, right? And so it applies across the spectrum, not just to high schoolers. It applies to middle schoolers as well. Now, this one is a little bit more high school based. Obviously, I mean, I have known occasionally a middle schooler who wants to take an AP course, but usually, right, there's a high school. Right? I'm an AP course. Do I have to take the AP exams? Now, I'm going to take this one because APs were like a personal favorite of mine. Is that okay, Casey?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
All right. So the really short answer for all you sophomores, juniors, seniors is, yeah, you do. Remember that, your AP course is going to go on your transcript. And it's going to go on there as an AP course. Now, colleges, therefore, especially if you're not a current senior, right? If you are a junior and below, freshman, sophomore, junior, 8th grader, right? If you are in that, they are going to expect to see that AP exam to go along, right? You can send that information. It can be part of your admissions profile. So they're going to want to see it. Now, at the end of the day, right, again, the same kind of thing. They're going to use that AP exam to get some context on your school courses. But at the end of the day, it's, again, you're showing your mastery, and you're showing, who you are in a particular field. And so you want to make sure that you have that, and you want, so that they're not going like, this guy took the AP course. Why didn't he take the AP exam? He must have done really badly. That might be the assumption they're going to make. So in reality, you always want to sort of take that AP exam if you're in that AP course. Casey, got anything else on that one?
Yeah, so just to kind of echo what Sam said, technically you don't strictly have to take the test, but you almost always should, because in addition to how that's going to reflect on your transcript, it also has a lot of value for you. So for me personally, for example, I took a lot of AP tests my senior year, and I was able to enter my freshman year with kind of a whole semester of credits out of the way. And that's what enabled me to do 2 majors and to take classes outside of my main field. I wouldn't have been able to do that and graduate on time if I hadn't had those AP credits as well. So just also thinking about the value that has to your future, especially that can be kind of hard to see if you're taking an AP class right now and you're on the younger side, maybe you're a sophomore, but it's already kind of time to start thinking ahead for that. And there's a lot that an AP course can do for you.
Now, sort of along, we're sort of talking about APs, but, again, for those of you who are younger, who are, what do you do with end of year tests? And I know I dealt a lot, I'm on the East Coast, and so we dealt a lot with the park, or, any of those particular state exams, those Common Core based one, right? New York Regents, APs, or just even school finals, right? And kids just sort of coming and being like, I've got a final on this. I don't remember anything from earlier. I don't remember anything from first semester. I don't remember anything from January. I don't remember anything from February, right? All that stuff, right? It's now like April or May. It's like right before their finals, and they're going, and so, this is a big one, right? When should I start preparing for the end of year tests? And so, yeah, Casey, you have any sort of experience on this too, besides what I was mentioning?
Oh, yes, I do. So whenever my students ask me when should I start preparing for end of year tests, I say now. So I know that seems like an overly simple answer, but basically you want to be thinking ahead towards the end game from the beginning if possible, but it's second semester now. And if you are working towards specific AP tests or you've got those state tests, the earlier you start getting ready and the more reinforcement you can have of the things you've learned in the past over time, the better you'll be able to do and the less you're going to find yourself cramming. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to start doing tons of practiced tests right away all of the time. What it does mean is that you should start thinking about, as you're working through the semester, what are the concepts that you're struggling with that you want to make sure you come back to and review? And how can you start studying effectively over time? So I think it's a good idea to start pretty much immediately reviewing concepts from your first semester and making sure you're doing that in forward thinking in an effective way. So in the previous webinar, I know that Sam talked about some of these concepts, and those tips will basically carry through to thinking about your end of year tests, just as they would carry through for general performance on your GPA.
Right, and I know one particular thing I talked a lot about was notes, right? Making sure that, and sorry, I'm going to just sort of piggyback on Casey here, but making sure that you're taking notes throughout the whole year. Make sure you have those notes. I know again, we sort of talked about the dangers of highlighting the previous one, and now it's not great. So make sure you're taking notes, right? Take notes, whatever form works for you, and review those notes. I remember, and in all honesty, it was one of those pet peeves of mine as a teacher where students would come in and they would be like, well, yeah, I took the test, so I don't need to know that anymore. And no. The unit test, yeah, I get that unit test, but you're going to have that information is going to carry on. This was, especially true in your math, your sciences, even in history, though, right? Events in the past affected the future. That's how it works. And so, not just cramming. I cannot stress enough the dangers of cramming. Don't wait till right before. Start early. Start now. If you feel like if this is giving a little panic in you, it's okay. You can handle it. Again, we talked about making a plan and setting things up, but get some studying in, right? 10, 20 minutes every day, every couple of days if it's really far out, but start preparing as soon as possible. And that'll be sort of a common theme throughout the day when we sort of go through this. So now, Casey, you want to sort of take on this one?
Sure. So one of the other big questions you'll have as you get into your second semester is how you're going to choose your courses for next year. I remember when I was still teaching, students would always come to me asking, oh gosh, how do I choose, how do I choose the right classes for my next year to set me up for success down the line? Because it can be very overwhelming, right? You can see tons of different options. You have the question of how many AP classes should I take? The question of should I be taking classes that align with a certain career goal I have? So we're going to answer a couple of those questions for you now. And when we start thinking ahead towards should I take those AP classes, or if you're on the younger side, maybe you're going into high school selecting courses, you might be thinking, should I take honors classes as a ninth grader? If so, how many? And when you're thinking about that, the one question I used to get all the time, and that some of you asked after the last webinar, is would it be better for me to take a more challenging class, an AP class, and get a B, or to take the regular class and get an A? And the general answer I gave to this is, well, what you really want is to get an A in the AP class, right? The question isn't about should I get an A in a regular class or a B in an AP class. What you really want is the A in the AP. That said, of course, we want to look at this a little realistically. So as I mentioned before, when colleges are eventually looking at your transcripts, they're going to be looking at your GPA and also your course load. So there may be a higher chance of you getting a slightly lower grade in your more advanced course. However, colleges want to see that you're challenging yourself, right? And for your own personal satisfaction and benefit, you also want to be challenging yourself as well. You want to be challenging yourself in a way that helps you figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. That helps you try out as many things as you can before you get out of high school. So generally, I recommend taking as challenging a course load as is recommended to you by your previous year teachers. They're usually going to give you some recommendations, right? Your teachers from your 8th grade year, if you're going to be a rising freshman, or just from your 2nd semester, they're going to be the ones who help you decide what courses you should take next year. And I would say that if your teachers are telling you that you're able to take the AP or honors course, that you should go with that. And if you need to reevaluate, you can always do so somewhere in the next semester.
Yeah, and also, if you aren't, let's say I know sort of Casey mentioned, 8th, 9th, 10th, so on and so forth, but also let's say, if you're a 5th grader or you're a 4th grader, you have to keep in mind something that, sometimes there are, not saying to say honors, that sometimes the word, but math tracks, right? Math tracks that you are on in middle school, in elementary school, do set you up going into high school. And so, making sure that you are, taking the courses that set you up for a higher math track, or set you up for, a more advanced science track, or English track, or whichever track it is. The most, again, pressing one sort of, I always remember being math, right? In 6th grade or 5th grade, right? Like, you sort of got set up for your math track, and making sure that you are taking whatever courses it takes, even if, maybe your grade's going to be slightly weaker, because, and this is something at least I felt was always the case. I always felt it was much harder to jump up into a higher class once you'd been sort of set into that lower one. Even if you had great grades in that class, usually the bar to maintain that track was a lot lower than the bar to jump up the track, right? You just had to sort of maintain a, usually it was, depending on the school, and this is something, sometimes it's like, oh, you just need to have a C plus or a B, or, you don't have to have an A in that higher course to maintain it going into, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. And so do keep in mind, that you do want to, keep an eye on those math tracks, especially as admissions do get more challenging both into high schools and into colleges. And so it is, something to keep an eye on if you are, let's say, more on the younger grade. But one other thing that, Casey was sort of mentioning in the very sort of beginning, right, was she was mentioning course selection about particular to an interest or a field. And this was, I don't know if you got this as a lot, right? What courses should I do? Like, I want to do this. So what courses, if I'm interested in being a business major, I'm interested in being a med student, or I want to do journalism or communications or all sorts of other things, A, what should I take? But B, like, do I have to take particular courses that connect with that? And this is always a really interesting question. Because at the end of the day, right, it comes down to, there are no, except for the literal credit requirements to get into a college, there are no requirements to get into a particular, right? You have to take whatever the requirements are that in terms of courses, right? 4 years of math, 4 years of English, right? 3 year, whatever the requirements are for your particular state. But you want to make sure that you always take sort of two types of courses in a sense. One, and we sort of talked before, right? Courses that will challenge you, right? Courses that will make you think, make you develop, make you grow. But second, and also of equal and sometimes greater importance, because it's sometimes very tied to the first, you want to take courses that are going to interest you. You want to take courses that, make you go, oh, this is fun, or this is interesting. And so, in a sense, right, that sort of falls into the sort of take courses that focus on a particular area, right? If you're in a particular area, you want to be something because that interests you, taking courses in that field should really, in a sense, ideally hit both of them, right? Ones that are going to challenge you, but also ones that you're going to be interested in, ones that are going to be fun and enjoyable. And it is something to, you don't want to veer away from it. Why, in a sense, you're not required to take, particular courses to get into a particular school. If you are interested in, let's say, something in the sciences, you do want to make sure you take like 4 years of science. Maybe you want to think about doubling up on one. Same thing goes if you're interested in math field or humanities, right? Oh, I'm really interested in taking, in being in journalism. Well, then maybe you want to take something, maybe the requirement's 4 years of English. Well, maybe you want to take a 5th English course. You want to double up in a particular year, right? There's nothing saying you don't have to just hyper focus, right? You don't necessarily want to be a one-trick pony, which can sometimes happen a lot if you just sort of hyper focus the courses. But you always want to keep those two particular areas in mind, right? You want to always take courses that are challenging. You want to take courses that are interesting, right? And so, in a sense, right, the first question, and that first question, should you focus, will almost always be answered by that, right? Yeah, in a sense, if you're interested in an area, filling those 2 requirements will almost always put you in that. You don't want to ignore the others, and this is an important piece. You don't want to necessarily ignore every other field but math, right? If you have the option to take a high-level course in a humanities, in a, arts, and you are a science-focused person, you still want to reach out for that opportunity, right? You don't want to, again, right, that goes back to that challenging course part. You don't want to give that up for the interest. You always want to have both. Casey, I don't know, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add here is when we have this question of what are my elective classes I'm going to take, I think especially the younger you are, you also want to take that chance to explore, right? When I was in high school, I was going to be the next April O'Neil. Maybe that reference dates me a little bit. I was going to be an ace reporter. It's what I really thought I wanted to do. But when I took that journalism class, I started to realize, oh, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should explore beyond this. And I ended up taking a couple of the elective AP science classes with labs, and I shifted my interest. So you also want to be thinking about exploring your options, because if you put yourself into one path at a certain, from the time you're in 8th grade, you're not giving yourself a whole lot of latitude to do things that you enjoy and that you might actually excel at. That's really all I have to add there.
All right. So, the next sort of, right, we're sort of moving along the year here, right? Planning for the summer was always after course, right? Once the courses are selected, right? Once we've talked about the GPA and the midterms and the finals and all that, right? That's what's next. And actually, this was an area where we got a whole ton of questions. And some of them were somewhat surprising, like, considering that we were talking about, right? Yeah, we were talking about second semester, but in a sense, right? Second semester leads toward that inevitable school's out moment, which, I remember when I was in high school was always a little bit of a mayhem on the campus and stuff. But there's always just that moment, right, where you're just setting up. But more importantly, and this comes down to something that, right, a lot of times, right, you don't plan your summer the last day of school, right? You don't plan what you're going to do if you're doing programs or doing things, right? That's not planned the last day of school. You're not just sitting down the last day of school saying, what am I going to do over the summer? No, you're usually planning that out months or days or months in advance, right? Vacations, those are, especially if you're going somewhere for, long period of time, those are usually planned far in advance. I don't, maybe some parents do it, the day before. But I know my parents always did it 3 months ahead of time. Summer programs, they have their deadlines, and so the big question, the sort of one that was, just the general, right? What do I do over the summer, right? What do I do during my summer? I have this 2-month block of time. I don't have school. What do I do? And the answer is actually not exactly, right? Casey, you want to take this one?
Yeah, of course. So Sam said that his family was very into planning things ahead of time. On the flip side, I came from a family that planned vacations very spur of the moment, last minute. And I found, later on as I got older, that I wish I'd been able to plan a little bit more concretely, because when you're thinking about using your summers wisely, if you really want to be able to take advantage of the opportunities available to you, you do have to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. So this question, first, I promise you there's not a single right answer to it. And second, the answer is going to vary a little bit depending on your age, where you are in your school timeline. But generally, you want to make sure you're doing something to explore an interest or to volunteer or to take a summer program. You want to be doing something that will help you further your goals for the future. You don't want any summer to be completely all just relaxing at the pool, or on the flip side, you do want to give yourself time to relax at the pool, right? So in order to get there, you're going to want to start exploring your options. There are a bunch of different opportunities that if you really look around, you might find really work for you. So perhaps if you're 15, 16 plus, you may want to get a job, or maybe you'll do some volunteering or community service. There are also a lot of summer programs you can apply into, usually starting around the middle school age and going all the way up through high school, that might allow you to take things like college courses or leadership conventions, or perhaps shadowing a doctor if you want to be a doctor, anything like that. And this is really the time you have available to you where you don't have any official classes going on unless you're in summer school, right? So this is really gonna give you an opportunity to use time in a way that you think works best for you. We actually have a lot of webinars in the past and also upcoming on our scheduled docket on this topic. So if you're more interested in the topic of how to use your summer, you can take a look at our webinar schedule and see if there's one you can attend that works well for you. Sam, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, a couple things. So yeah, like, you know, there is a bajillion options out there. I know for me, like, I think I spent all 4 summers of high school doing 4 slightly different things. It was like one year I did I actually don't remember what I did my freshman year, between my freshman and sophomore year. But I remember, like, my sophomore year, I took like a summer course, and I was really sort of hoping to use that course to sort of place me in, out of a course in school and into a higher level course. I used it actually to take an extra AP in my junior year. And junior year, I did like more of a summer program connected to an interest. And then between senior and college, I got a job. And so, like, what you do can be slightly different, but you always want to sort of have a plan in mind. And you always want to make sure, again, and this is critical. It's a spectrum, right? On one end, you have, I am going to sit on my butt on the couch watching Netflix the entire summer. And the other is, I am going to spend 1 hour a day at home, and it's going to be eating, and then I'm going to go to sleep. Because I'm busy doing, this program, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Right? Those are 2 ends of the spectrum. And the reality is, you want to be somewhere in between the 2. You don't want to be doing so much, even if you love it, that you don't have the minute to stop, recharge, right? Because in all honesty, that you need that time to recharge. It's going to make you sharper for those activities that you're doing, right? You need to make sure you get your sleep. I know so many students don't sleep during the year. Do sleep, make sure you get those 8 hours of sleep over the summer. Don't go nuts. Don't sleep till like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but like, make sure you catch up on your sleep during your summer. And so, like, plan things out so that you have a mix of that, like, hey, I'm going to chill with my friends, and, I'm going to be doing this because this is something I'm interested in, this is something I want to do, or, this is going to get me ahead moving forward. And so you always want to keep that balance between them. Now, we talk specifically about summer programs, and I know we're going to be talking about this, right? We have, again, upcoming webinars. We have past webinars on this particular topic with summer programs. When should I start looking for and applying for summer programs? And this was a particular question when we were talking, based on, we were talking in the previous one about using summers wisely. And that's why a lot of these sort of popped up. The reality of the matter is that a lot of summer programs, the deadlines are now, right? The deadlines are earlier than most people think. Some of them will open up in December of last year. Some of them open up middle of January, right? Some of them open up in February. Some of them open up, March, but then they're due in April, right? A lot of programs are either ongoing, some of them are done, right? Some of them, that deadline might have already passed. And some of them are, their deadline's not until March or April, but they've opened up. The application process has opened up. And that matters a lot, especially if it's a first come, first serve type of program, right? It might be a rolling admission. It might be something that you should be, the earlier you apply, the better the chance you have of getting in. And so the reality of the matter is, you want to start looking now. And again, like I said before, that's going to be a very common answer to a lot of these when should I types of questions. There's actually another one coming up later on. But when should you? It's never too soon. Never too soon to start looking again. When I did my summer program, I'm pretty sure, I feel like my application deadline was in like February. I don't remember, it might have been early March, but it was early on. It was at Northwestern University in Chicago. So it was relatively, prestigious. And so, depending, especially if it's a more prestigious or a more sort of like selective group, depending on how you take. Obviously, things like Johns Hopkins C2Y have multiple sort of batches. But ironically, Johns Hopkins C2Y is in fact a first come, first serve. They start filling up the classes that you can take early, right? So the later you wait to apply, the less options you have for things like summer classes, And so regardless, whether you want to take a summer class, whether you want to do a summer program, the earlier you start looking, the earlier you decide, and the earlier you get your application process in order, the better it's going to be. Again, if we have a lot of things. I know there is going to be an upcoming webinar on this particular topic. And so, take a look at that. And there'll be some more information, right? You can look at, or if you don't want to wait, you can take a look at one of our past webinars on the topic. Casey, do you have anything else you want to add?
Sure. The only thing I'll add here is that if you're not really sure where to start, you can always talk to your teachers, your coaches, and they may be able to help you out. The summer program, I attended a summer program for music that my orchestra director referred me to and was able to set me up with a scholarship. So you can always talk to your or your child's coaches, teachers, etc. if you're not sure where to start looking yourself.
Awesome. All right, so this question. Or these questions, extracurriculars, biggie, right? I remember doing a whole bunch of them. So many students have extracurriculars: sports, clubs, activities, rehearsals, dance practice, piano practice, singing lessons, robotics club, football, tons of them. Big part of every kid's life. And balancing them with school, but with all the other things we've been talking about, is often a challenge. And that was by far and away the biggest question. How do I balance the academics and the big Z extracurricular life? And I'll take this one, actually, if you don't mind, Casey.
Go for it.
But at the end of the day, it is a challenge. And the best advice I can give anybody, the best advice for this I can give somebody, is to make sure you plan, to have a plan. I know we talked about this in the previous webinar, but make sure that you have a plan for the day, for the week, for the month, and include that extracurricular material, right? Include the time that you're in those extracurriculars. Include maybe a little bit of buffer time in case there's a random practice or a random, game goes longer than you expect, right? Build in the time, but make sure if you are in the middle of your sports season or the sports season is coming up, right? You're playing a spring sport, that you sit down and you're like, okay, for sports season, this is the situation. These are where my practices are. These are where my games are. This is what I'm doing. And work into building out your academics into that. Make sure you have a plan. Make sure you have goals that also take into consideration your extracurricular. Maybe if you are, that you're playing a busy sport coming up, whatever spring sport is big in your particular school that you're a part of, or activity or club. Maybe there's a club starting up second semester, or with the warmer weather, there's something you do outside. Maybe there's a community service event that you're part of. That you set your goals for your school with them in mind, but don't necessarily subsume your schoolwork because of your extracurriculars. So don't be like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to improve my grades because I'm going to be really busy with my extracurriculars. Make sure you set a goal that is going to be manageable. Maybe it's not going from an F to an A in a single semester. Maybe it's saying, all right, I want to make sure I have a B. All right, I want to make sure that I can maintain a B, that I get my homework done on the day before, that I study, I don't study the night before the test. I study 3 days, right? Make sure you have those goals and that you have that plan already sort of set up so that you can balance that. Casey, anything else you want to put to that?
I have a couple things to add, but I think they're probably best categorized under our next question.
Yeah, the next one. Right? The sort of the flip sides of that. I was overwhelmed by those extracurriculars, right? Oh my God, it was driving me crazy. What do I do? Casey, obviously, you might as well take this one since you sort of started it.
Yeah. So especially if you're in your second semester now and you're thinking, last semester I had too much to do, right? So now that you're heading into, or whatever part of the way through you are in your second semester, it might be time to start weighing your options. It's a really good time to start thinking about that. So the first thing you want to do is think a little bit about what your options are and also what your priorities are. So, for example, if I have a winter sport as opposed to a fall sport, I need to weigh whether my sport is, more or less important to me than perhaps my journalism club, whatever the case may be. Because sometimes the truth is you do have to either cut back or reorganize, right? Maybe you want to switch your focus to a sport that happens in spring instead, or vice versa, that kind of thing. So generally, the way I like to think about this is, as Sam said again, is trying to plan. And part of trying to plan means looking at how you used your time in the past. So what parts of the year in your first semester were the parts that you had the most trouble? Were they the times when, you were about to be heading for the big speech conference meet? And then at the same time of year, you also had your midterms coming up? Or did you have more trouble towards the end of the year, that kind of thing? That's going to help you decide what extracurriculars you can handle and when, to some extent. Then like I said, sometimes you may need to pull back from a few things, but really that's your worst case scenario, right? And ultimately, just because you're having trouble with something right now and you feel like you need to dial back from your activity right now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit forever, right? Sometimes it can be okay to take a quick break from, your youth in government. Youth in government was my favorite activity. And there was a time when I did have to take a break for one quarter because during that quarter, I was having a lot of trouble it's definitely with my calculus class, and I was a senior. But they welcomed me back after that because when I told them I was going to need to drop down for that quarter, they were able to plan for and accommodate that, right? I made sure to talk to my coaches and let them know what was going on so that when I came back, they'd be ready to help me back. So you can always kind of, again, like Sam says, plan and look backwards and look ahead to try to make things a little easier for yourself in the future. And I think that's it for me. Sam, did you have anything else there?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, it's, they can be overwhelming, and just, making sure, in all honesty, right, just having a plan, right? Not just sort of flying by your seat of your pants and just sort of doing everything as it comes day by day, but thinking out, what's your on Monday, looking at what Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is going to look like, looking at what your weekend's going to look like the week before, the 2 weeks before, really is going to be one of your best strategies for dealing with all this. Now, one thing that we sort of didn't talk about, talk about GPA, we talked about this. We didn't really talk about those tests, right? Now, regardless of what standardized tests, right? SSAT, ISEE, if you're in middle school, again, those state tests that could also be standardized, or, PSAT, if you're 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade now, right? Because they added the new PSATs in. Or, SAT, ACT, if you're getting older and looking at college, right? Standardized tests will play a whole large chunk in the second semester, right? It's either, your last chance to take them. It's, maybe sometimes the first time you're looking at them, right? There's a large chunk of time that standardized test sort of falls into that second semester. And so looking really just at the SAT, ACT, right? When should you take it? And, there's multiple answers to this, but in some ways, a good sort of quick answer, right? When should you take an SAT or an ACT? Or, is partly when you're ready, right? Partly when you've had the prep, had the support behind it, you've gone for that, you are, looking at that, because you have to understand about these tests, SAT, ACT, SSAT, any of them really, that they're going to use sometimes a different set of skills than you're used to using in school. And so you can't necessarily go from doing your school directly into, taking these tests. Now, when it comes to these tests, using those summers is a great way of getting right. So maybe you want to try your summer between, there are obviously some more particularly challenging years, but like using a summer right before a particularly challenging year that you're concerned with, or the summer after you've covered the material, right? If you're on a particular math track to get done, whether it's as a sophomore, as a junior, when you're done with your sophomore year, you're done with your junior year, using that summer to sort of plan out for it. can always be a really good way of using that, right? So you're starting over the second semester to start looking at it, start planning it, but the pressure of it isn't on you during that second semester, right? Or, taking the pressure off and maybe taking a practice run at it during that second semester, maybe taking a February, an April, a June ACT, or a March or a May SAT, but right, realizing that you're going to take it again, maybe over that summer, and that you can just sort of do it to try to see where you stand, so you can sort of, again, plan things out. But that, it's not like, oh, I have to do amazing on this test, right? And so just always think about those options when you look at your SAT, your ACT. If you look, obviously your PSAT, you don't really have a choice of when you take it, but or even with the SSAT or the ISE, right? Like making sure that you have some work into it if you are looking to apply to a private high school, right? You have some prep, some planning behind it so that you're ready for it, right? Because again, those tests are going to be different than what you've been doing in school. Casey, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that you also want to look at when your school is offering those tests at school, if they are. Many states offer the SAT or ACT or even require them, and a lot of the time they are offering those in the second semester of your junior year. And it's a really common time for students to be targeting their first SAT or ACT date. So you want to find out when those things are offered and see if you can either take advantage of an optional course or be prepared to take one that's actually actively required.
All right. So we sort of already covered this, and I apparently spoke over myself, right? But when should I start preparing for this? So since I already sort of spoke about this, Casey, why don't you sort of take this one?
Yeah, so Sam hit most of it, but again, you're going to be shocked when I say the answer to when should I start preparing is, well, now. I'll dial that back a little bit because, depending on your age, it may not yet be time for you to start preparing explicitly for the SAT or ACT, but as before, sooner is usually better. If you are currently especially if you're currently in your junior or sophomore year, it can really be time to start thinking about how to use your summer and then your upcoming year to work through this. The only thing I think I'll add that Sam didn't mention and we didn't really talk about before is that if you're looking ahead at the PSAT, the SSAT, the ISEE, sometimes your target dates for those will be a little different. Right. The PSAT is offered in the fall, and then the SSAT and ISEE tests are usually offered year-round, but you may need to complete them a lot sooner in order to apply to the high schools you're looking to apply to, if that's something you're looking for. So just like with the last question, you want to take a look at, what your important test dates are, and then start preparing as soon as it's reasonably possible for you, and as soon as the test is kind of at an appropriate level for you. For some of you, depending on your age, there are, for example, certain topics on the SAT math that maybe you're just not ready to tackle yet. The SAT math heads all the way up to pre-calc. So if you're still in Algebra 1, it may not necessarily be in your best interest to start looking ahead to the pre-calc stuff yet. That's really all I have to say here that Sam didn't already say, so I'll just hand it back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to add one more thing with this, which is we were sort of talking about the summer before, and it is important to know that even if you are in a grade, you're not a sophomore or a junior, or you're not looking to go into a private high school, the SSAT, ISE, there are some of those summer programs that also look for a standardized test. And so, piggybacking on what we were talking about with planning for the summer, as you start looking, remember, usually the answer to when should I start is now. So when you do start looking at those summer programs, do keep an eye on what they require. If they require that, and you might again want to maybe then start looking at your SAT or your ACT or whatever it is that you're needed for those tests. But otherwise, again, it is somewhat time sensitive, but usually sooner is the better. Now,
it's a good point.
Sort of going through the questions, right there, we sort of were able to bucket a lot of these into some categories, but there are a couple questions that just sort of were on their own. And we thought were important enough to sort of answer, and I'm just going to sort of run through these really quickly, that we want to make sure we answer them. And the biggest one, and when it came to second semester, I thought this was a great question, but it was like, I don't like reading. I don't like it. What do I do? How do I get better at reading? I struggle in English. I struggle in this. I don't like reading. Help. Or my child doesn't like reading, right? it was always, it almost is its own category, right? The perpetual reading, and I had so many students that didn't like reading. I particularly remember one girl that, working through this with, and she was just so concerned about her reading and how it would affect her. And she's like, I just don't like it, right? TV, but it's always that like, what do I do if I'm not, or my child's not a big reader? And the unfortunate answer for this is that reading is like any other, it's like a sport. It's like an activity, right? If you don't do it, if you don't, right, practice, you're not going to get better at it. And you're not necessarily going to like it either, right? A lot of people don't like things they never do. But, they're also not going to be good at things that you don't do. And so, unfortunately, the answer for this is they do have to read. But the way in which they go about it can be different, right? The first thing to do is always to find something that they like. What do they like? Do they like sports? Do they like science? Do they like computers? Do they like fantasy, superheroes, video games, whatever it is that they like? Let them read that, right? Whether it's a book, a magazine, maybe they're a big video game player. Okay, let them start with Ready Player One or something along those lines. Maybe they're big into sports and they can read articles from Sports Illustrated or some magazine that not Reddit or anything like online, but like an actual periodical that they can look at. Maybe it's, and have them start with something short, 15 minutes. 15 minutes every other day, 15 minutes every 3 days, right? Just something to get them doing it on something that they like, on something that interests them, and for a short period of time. And they just sit down, they put the phone away, sit down, they read. I always recommend right before bed, right? They shouldn't be staring at the screens before bed anyway. It's bad for you. That's scientific fact. If it's science, let them read, whatever it is, let them read 15 minutes every other day, every couple days, right? And then as they do it, build up. Maybe, after a week, it's 20 minutes every couple of days. Then maybe it's 25 minutes every couple of days. Then maybe it's 15 minutes, but you do it every day, right? Build up to it so that they're reading more and more and more. And don't set you have to read these books. You have to read this much in like a month. Just start by just getting them to do it. And that is, the thing. And then there's always the question, and Casey, maybe you want to add to this, right, of audiobook versus the real book, right, print book, and what the benefits and the strengths of those are. I lean towards real books. There are a lot of skills that are developed from those. One thing you can sort of do to bring in the audiobook is let them sort of alternate, right? They read a little bit, maybe they read one chapter in the real book, then they listen to one chapter in the audiobook, right? But you do want to make sure you sort of tie it back into that actual skill. Before I move on, Casey, did you have anything else you wanted to add to this?
No, like you said, that I'm an audiobook fan. However, if you're trying to build that skill of reading comprehension and reading stamina, the kind of thing you'll need when you're reading textbooks in college or taking your tests, then I agree with you. I think the physical book has little substitute. But if it's choice between not reading at all or reading audiobooks, of course, the audiobook can be a helpful thing for you or your student to do while they're exercising, training, anything like that.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. So then the next question, I'll again just sort of run through the rest of these, was what's more, how do schools, whether it being a high school or a college, look at an A versus an A minus, a B versus a B plus, a C, all those. So the answer is, there isn't a massive difference between a lot of them. It rarely are people going to get to that fine line. They tend to look at sort of bigger picture stuff overall. So whether your child, has an A versus an A minus shouldn't affect them getting into a particular high school or a particular course. Unless they're very explicit to school about you have to have a B plus or higher or something like that, but usually that isn't the case. So usually they say you have to have a B, and they'll take anything with a B in it. But most schools in terms of admissions don't really look that differently on either of those. And so, it's usually not worth splitting the hairs. If you want to go from the A minus to the A, by all means, again, make that into your plan, set yourself up to do that. But, in terms of whether it's going to make or break some form of an application, either for high school or for college, not really. Another great question was about National Honor Society, right? Which is this sort of big extracurricular. Like, how important is it to have a National Honor Society, right? We're talking about extracurriculars, talking about like balancing all that, and like, what was the National Honor Society? The National Honor Society is great, right? You're on it. It has a lot of things that are looked at highly for colleges in terms of leadership, in terms of community service, in terms of all sorts of things. But it is important to realize that is not the only source for those particular aspects, right? It's not the only source for having your certain extracurricular. So there's no set extracurricular, academic or otherwise, that like is supremely important to have in order to get into a particular college. And so you want to always make sure you have something that interests you. It's great. The things that it offers in the National Honor Society are great, but is it critical? No, not particularly. Casey, were there any other particular questions that you remember being of utter importance that we need to answer?
Utter importance? No, I think we've hit all the big ones.
All right. Anything else to add to any of those before?
No, I think you covered it. The National Honor Society is great, but it's not the only option.
Right. And if anybody actually has any other questions, I know we did cover an awful lot of questions today. I'm sure, there are some as well that you still want to ask, that you still have maybe things we said offered up new questions that you want to ask. Please feel free to reach out to us. Please, we're certainly happy to help. We have hundreds, almost 200 centers across the entire country. And we help with anything from GPA support from K all the way up to 12, SAT prep, prepping for summers, course selection, pretty much any aspect of things that we talked about. Setting up plans if you need some help with that planning process that we talked left, right, and center. Summer programs. Feel free to come if you want to be connected. If you have additional questions, or if you just want to have a free, no obligation conference with one of our center directors, please, at the end of this, there will be a survey. Please leave your name, phone number that we can reach you at, and your zip code. Please leave the zip code so that I can be certain to provide, and connect you to the closest center and not one 3,000 miles away. That would just not be a good thing for me to do. Otherwise, Casey, anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, I guess the last thing is that, at C2, one of the things you're going to get is both help with the academic planning and counseling and the tutoring. So all this stuff is something we're really able to provide support for, and we want to thank you for coming out and listening to us today.
Yes, thank you so much. For all of you going into the second semester, I wish you the best of luck.
Yes, you can do it. Good luck.
Yes, always say that to yourself, that you can do it. Otherwise, thank you so much. I'm so glad you could all join us, and we hope you all have a wonderful night.